Something wasn't right, and you could feel it immediately. A Team USA head coach doesn't just vanish in the middle of an international tournament. That doesn't happen unless something serious is going on behind the scenes. And yet, that's exactly what happened here. Kara Lawson is leading this team, then suddenly she's not even on the sideline. No clear explanation, no real statement, just gone. And right in the middle of all this, Caitlin Clark. That's where this whole situation starts to feel bigger than just a coaching change. Because let's be honest, coming into this tournament, everyone knew what Clark was. Not just a good player, not just a young prospect, the most exciting player in women's basketball right now. The kind of player who changes how a team plays the second she steps on the floor. But instead of building around that, the plan was the complete opposite. She's coming off the bench in 4 out of 5 games. Limited minutes, slower pace, less control of the offense. And you're watching it thinking, why? Then game 1 happens. She doesn't even start, barely gets full run, and still walks out of that game breaking multiple records. Highest assist total ever for a USA debut in this setting. Records that had been sitting there for years, gone in one night. And the response to that? Put her right back on the bench next game. That's when people started raising eyebrows. Because it's not just about starting or not starting, it's how the team was playing. Everything felt slow. Half-court sets, long possessions, veterans controlling the ball, and Clark, the best decision maker in transition, sitting and watching. You could see it clearly. The offense wasn't bad, but it wasn't dangerous either. It had no real edge, no pressure on the defense, just controlled, predictable basketball. And here's what a lot of people missed at first. This wasn't random. This was a philosophy. The idea was to make Clark fit into a system instead of letting the system adjust to her. Play slower, move off the ball, be more controlled. On paper, that might sound fine, but when you actually watch it play out, it just didn't match who she is as a player. Because Clark's game is built on speed, on quick reads, on seeing plays before they even happen. When you take that away, you're not just limiting her, you're limiting the entire offense. And that disconnect, that's where everything started to build. And once you saw that disconnect, you couldn't unsee it. Every possession started to feel the same. The ball would come up the floor, the offense would settle into a set, and by the time anything actually happened, the shot clock was already halfway gone. It looked organized, sure, but it didn't look threatening. And that's the difference people kept reacting to. This team wasn't overwhelming anyone, even though the talent was clearly there. Meanwhile, Clark would check in, and for a few moments, everything would speed up. The ball would move quicker, the defense would start scrambling, you'd see openings appear that just weren't there before. And then just as it started to feel different, she's back on the bench again. That rhythm never had a chance to fully build. So now you've got this weird situation. Your most dynamic player is coming off the bench, breaking records in limited time, and the team is still choosing to slow everything down. It didn't feel like they were maximizing what they had. It felt like they were holding something back. Then comes the Puerto Rico game, and that's where things really shift, because for the first time the issues weren't just subtle, they were obvious. Clark's minutes drop even more, and Puerto Rico comes in with a clear plan. Box and one defense, fully focused on taking her out. And it worked. Not because she couldn't handle it, but because the system around her didn't adjust. That's the part people need to understand. A defense like that is beatable, but only if your offense reacts. You need movement, spacing, quick decisions. Instead, everything stayed slow, predictable, easy to read. So now not only is Clark limited, the entire offense starts to look stuck. And if you were watching that game, you felt it. It wasn't just frustration, it was confusion. Commentators noticed it. Fans noticed it. You could almost feel the questions building in real time. Why isn't this changing? Why isn't the offense adapting? Why is your best playmaker not being fully used when the game is clearly asking for it? But even with all that going on, here's the crazy part. Clark is still leading the team in plus minus and efficiency. Let that sink in. Limited role, inconsistent minutes, system not built for her, and she's still the most effective player on the floor when she plays. That's not normal. That's not something you just brush off, because at that point, it stops being about preference or style. Now it starts to look like a real mismatch between what the team is doing and what it actually needs. And when it reaches that point, the conversation shifts. It's no longer just fans debating rotations or minutes. Now people are questioning the decisions themselves. Because if your most efficient player is being used like a role piece, something isn't lining up. And that tension really shows up after that Puerto Rico game. Lawson steps up to the podium, gets asked directly about Clark's role, and instead of addressing it, she moves right past it. No real explanation, no acknowledgement of what everyone just watched. Just a general answer about the team. And that moment stood out more than anything, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't say. Because at that point, the numbers were already there. The impact was already clear. This wasn't speculation anymore. And when a coach avoids that kind of question, people notice. It adds to the feeling that something isn't being handled the right way. Then everything flips. Game 3 comes around, and Lawson isn't there. Just like that. No build-up, no detailed update, nothing you can point to and say, okay, that explains it. She's simply not on the sideline. sideline. And now Nate Tibbetts is the one calling plays, managing rotations, running the team. And that's where it gets even more unusual. Because Tibbetts wasn't part of this setup going into the tournament, he's the Phoenix Mercury head coach. That's his job. So seeing him suddenly step in and take over mid-tournament, that doesn't just happen randomly. Someone made that decision, and USA Basketball staying completely quiet about it only made things louder. No statement, no clarification, no timeline. When something this visible happens and there's no explanation, people are going to start connecting dots. That's just how it works. And the timing? It's hard to ignore. This change happens right after the Puerto Rico game, right after the questions about Clark's role hit their peak, right after that press conference where nothing was really addressed. All of it lines up too cleanly to feel like coincidence. Now, to be fair, nobody officially comes out and says what happened. There's no confirmation tying this directly to Clark or the way she was being used. And that matters. You can't just assume things without proof. But at the same time, you can look at what's right in front of you. Because in sports, decisions usually show you the truth faster than statements do. And what happens next is where everything starts to make a lot more sense. Because the very first thing Tibbetts does tells you everything you need to know. No easing into it. No slow adjustment. No waiting to see how things go. He puts Caitlin Clark in the starting lineup immediately. That's his first move running this team. And just like that, the entire feel of the game changes. They come out against New Zealand, and it doesn't look like the same team at all. The pace is faster right away. The ball is moving earlier in possessions. Clark is pushing in transition, making reads before the defense even gets set. Teammates are getting cleaner looks, and you can actually see the spacing open up. It's not forced, it's not complicated, it just flows. And the result? A 50-point win. Now, you can say New Zealand isn't the toughest opponent, and that's fair. But this wasn't just about who they were playing, it was about how they were playing. Because nothing about the roster changed. Same players, same talent. The only real difference was the system and who was running it. Clark plays 23 minutes, puts up 14 points, 6 assists, and doesn't turn the ball over once. That's clean, controlled, efficient basketball. But more importantly, the offense finally looks alive. It has rhythm, it has pressure. It actually feels like it can overwhelm a defense instead of just working through it. And that's the key point a lot of people miss. This wasn't about making Clark the star just for the sake of it. It was about putting the ball in the hands of the player who naturally speeds everything up and makes everyone else better. Under Lawson, the system came first and Clark had to adjust to it. Under Tibbetts, the system adjusts to Clark. That's a completely different approach, and the difference shows up immediately on the court. You start seeing quicker decisions, earlier passes, better shot quality. Defenders can't just sit and wait anymore, because now they have to react. And once a defense is reacting instead of setting up, everything becomes easier. And the most important part? It didn't look forced. It didn't look like some big experiment. It looked natural, like this is how it should have been from the start. That's why that first game under Tibbetts mattered so much. Not just because of the score, but because it exposed something. It showed how much had been left on the table before, and once that door opened, there was no going back. Because now you've seen the difference, and it's impossible to ignore. It's not theory anymore, it's right there on the court. The same team that looked controlled but limited suddenly looks fast, confident, and hard to stop. The next game only reinforces it. Clark is still starting, still running the offense, and now you see even more adjustment around her. Guard-heavy lineups, more spacing, more freedom to make decisions early. She's sharing the floor with players like Kelsey Plum and Paige Bueckers, and instead of everything slowing down, it actually becomes more dangerous. Because now you've got multiple players who can handle the ball, but Clark is still the one setting the tone. She's pushing the pace, drawing attention, and creating opportunities before defenses can organize themselves. And when defenses do try to adjust, it just opens something else up. Italy doesn't have an answer for it. They try to contain, try to match up, but the speed and movement keep breaking things apart. And again, the result speaks for itself. Another big win, this time by 34 points. But just like before, it's not only about the margin, it's how easy the offense starts to look. You see possessions where the ball doesn't stick. One pass turns into two turns into a wide open shot. You see defenders scrambling, rotating late, trying to catch up instead of controlling anything. That's what happens when the pace is right, and the reads are quick. And this is where the conversation gets clearer. Because now you're not just comparing wins and losses, you're comparing styles. Under Lawson, everything was structured first, reactive second. Under Tibbetts, it flips. Now it's about creating pressure first and letting the structure support it. That shift changes everything. It doesn't just make Clark look better, it makes the entire team look better. Players are getting easier shots, the floor feels bigger, the energy is different, and again, nothing about the roster changed. That's what makes it stand out so much. Same players, same talent level, completely different results based on how they're being used. So when people go back and look at those first couple of games, it's hard not to question it. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just logically. Because now there's a clear contrast sitting right in front of you. And when you zoom out and look at the full tournament, that contrast becomes even harder to argue against. Because this isn't just about one blowout game or one lineup change that happened to work. The numbers across all 5 games tell the same story. Clark ends up leading Team USA in assists, plus minus, and overall efficiency for the entire tournament. Not just during the games she started, all of them, including the ones where she was coming off the bench and playing limited minutes. And it doesn't stop there. She also leads the entire tournament in plus minus and efficiency. Every player, every country, across every game. That's the part that really settles the debate. Because now you're not relying on opinions or eye test alone. The data lines up with what you were seeing. When she's on the floor, the team is better, consistently. And that makes the earlier decisions stand out even more. Because if this level of impact is happening in a reduced role, you naturally start wondering what it would have looked like if things were different from the beginning. If she's starting all 5 games, if the system is built around her from day one, how much bigger do those numbers get? You don't have to exaggerate it to see the point. What she already did was historic. Multiple records, tournament-wide impact, and she's doing it at just 22 years old. That alone is enough to tell you how special the performance was. But beyond the stats, there's another layer to this that people started noticing. The style itself became more enjoyable to watch. The games had energy, the ball was moving, the pace was up, and it felt like the team had personality instead of just structure. That matters more than people think. Because when a team finds a rhythm that fits its best players, everything starts to connect. Players play more freely, decisions come quicker, confidence builds naturally instead of being forced. And that's exactly what it looked like here. Under Tibbets, the team didn't just win, it looked comfortable doing it. So by the time the final games rolled around, the conversation wasn't really a debate anymore. Clark is starting, she's playing the most minutes, and the results are clear. The earlier questions about her role, those disappear almost completely, because at some point, the performance becomes too obvious to ignore. And by the end of it, the numbers weren't just impressive, they were overwhelming. Clark wasn't just contributing, she was leading in almost every meaningful category. Minutes, points, efficiency, assists, free throws, it all stacks up. And again, this is after spending most of the early part of the tournament coming off the bench. She becomes the youngest player ever to win MVP in this qualifying tournament at just 22. That alone tells you how dominant the overall impact was. Not flashes, not moments, full control of games when she was actually given the chance to run them. And here's where things get even more interesting. Across the span of this tournament, she ends up tied to 14 world records in just a week. Think about that for a second. That's not something you see in normal situations, and it's definitely not something you expect from a player who wasn't even starting at the beginning. So naturally, the question starts to come up again. What does this look like if the roles were clear from day one? If the system was built around her from the start instead of shifting midway through? Because what she produced in a limited, inconsistent role is already historic. The version where everything is aligned from the beginning, that might be on a completely different level, but the impact didn't stop on the court. You could feel the attention growing around the tournament itself. More eyes, more conversation, more interest. Clark's presence wasn't just affecting games, it was affecting how people were watching those games. That kind of influence matters, especially with bigger things like sponsorships and league growth always in the background. And that leads into something a lot of fans started paying attention to, the coaching situation beyond this tournament. Because Stephanie White, who is set to coach Clark in Indiana, was part of this staff. She saw everything up close. The early approach, the shift after the change, the difference in results. This tournament basically became a live test of 2 different ideas. One where Clark adjusts to a slower, more controlled system, and one where the system adjusts to her natural style. And the results between those 2 weren't subtle at all. So now, looking ahead, people aren't just talking about what happened here, they're thinking about what comes next. Because this wasn't just a short tournament storyline, it felt like something that could shape bigger decisions going forward. And that's really where this whole thing lands. Not in rumors, not in guesses about what was said behind closed doors, but in what actually played out on the court. Because at the end of the day, that's the part you can trust. The results, the style, the way the team functioned before and after the change. Under Lawson, the approach was clear. Structured offense, slower pace, defined roles, and Clark fitting into that system. And to be fair, the team was still winning. This wasn't a disaster, but it never looked like the best version of what this group could be. It looked controlled, but limited. Then Tibbets steps in and the shift is immediate. Pace goes up, decisions happen earlier, spacing improves, and Clark becomes the center of everything. Not forced, not exaggerated, just naturally aligned with how she plays. And once that happens, the entire team starts to look different. That's the part people sometimes oversimplify. This wasn't about choosing one player over everyone else. It was about understanding what makes your team work at its highest level. And in this case, the answer became pretty clear once the system changed. The wins got bigger, the offense got smoother, and the identity of the team finally made sense. Players looked more comfortable, the game felt easier, and most importantly, it looked repeatable. Not just one good night, but something that could carry forward. So when people talk about whether something went wrong earlier in the tournament, you don't need to jump to extreme conclusions. You can just look at the contrast. Same roster, same competition, two different approaches, two very different results. And that's why this story stuck with so many fans. Not because of what was said, but because of what was shown. It felt like a clear example of how much coaching decisions can shape everything, especially when you're dealing with a player who sees the game the way Clark does. Now the real question isn't just about what happened in this tournament, it's about what people take from it moving forward. Because once you've seen what works this clearly, it's hard to ignore it. So here's the question that really matters. Was this just a mid-tournament adjustment, or did Team USA quietly show exactly what the right way to use Caitlin Clark has been all along? And the more you sit with it, the more this stops feeling like a random mid-tournament adjustment and starts looking like a clear correction. Because nothing about what happened after the change felt experimental. It felt obvious. Like the answer had been there the whole time, it just wasn't being used. You go back to those first two games and it almost feels like a different team entirely. Not because the players were worse, but because they were being asked to play in a way that didn't bring out their strengths. Everything was slower, more controlled, more predictable. It worked enough to win, but it didn't unlock anything. Then once Clark is given control, everything opens up. And it's not just her numbers that improve, it's how everyone else benefits from it. Teammates are getting easier looks, defenses are forced to move earlier, and the pressure shifts completely. Instead of reacting to the defense, now the defense is reacting to them. That's what high-level playmaking does. It doesn't just show up in assists or stats, it changes how the entire game flows. And that's exactly what you started seeing once the system matched Clark's natural style. So when people ask if this was about one player getting more opportunity, that's not really the full picture. This was about alignment, about putting the right pieces in the right roles so the team could function at its highest level. And once that alignment happened, the difference wasn't subtle at all. It also explains why the earlier approach felt so frustrating to watch, because even without diving into advanced stats, you could feel something was off. The rhythm wasn't there. The pressure wasn't consistent. It looked like a team holding back instead of pushing forward. And once that changes, it's almost impossible to go back, because now the standard is set. You've seen what this group looks like when everything clicks, and it's not something you can ignore or pretend didn't happen. That's why this situation stuck with so many people. Not because of rumors or speculation, but because the basketball itself told the story. And once the game starts telling you something, that clearly you either adjust or you get left behind. And that's why the conversation going forward feels so important, because this wasn't just a one-time situation. It exposed something bigger about how teams handle players like Clark. When you have someone who can control pace, read the floor early, and create for everyone else, you don't slow that down, you build around it. This tournament basically showed two paths in real time. One where you try to fit a unique player into a preset system, and one where you let that player shape the system itself. Both can work to a degree, but only one of them actually unlocks the full potential of the team. And that's the part fans were reacting to the whole time. It wasn't just about minutes or starting lineups. It was about watching a style of play that didn't match the talent on the floor. And once the adjustment happened, it confirmed what a lot of people were already feeling. You could see it in how quickly the team settled into that new identity. There was no long transition period, no confusion, no hesitation. It clicked almost instantly. That tells you the players were ready for it. The pieces already fit, they just needed to be used differently. And now, looking ahead, that creates real expectations. Because once you've seen a team operate at that level, anything less starts to stand out. You can't go back to slower, more restrictive basketball without people questioning it. The standard has changed. It also puts more focus on coaching decisions moving forward. Not in a negative way, but in a realistic one. Adjustments matter. Understanding your players matters. And being willing to shift when something isn't working matters even more, because this situation showed how quickly things can turn once the right decision is made. Same roster, same tournament. Completely different outcome just based on approach. That's not something you ignore, especially at this level. So now the attention shifts from what happened to what happens next. Because the blueprint is there, the results are there, and everyone watching saw exactly how it played out. And that's what makes the ending of this whole situation feel less like a mystery and more like a message. Not something that needed to be announced, not something that had to be explained in detail, but something you could clearly see if you just followed the games. A coach steps away mid-tournament, a new one comes in, one key decision changes everything, and suddenly the team looks like what people expected from the start. You don't need inside reports to understand that shift. The basketball already told you. Clark finishes the tournament as the youngest MVP in this setting, leading in the most important impact stats across the entire field. The team finishes strong, the wins get more convincing, and the identity becomes clear. Fast, decisive, aggressive basketball built around a player who thrives in that environment. And when you line all of that up, it's hard to treat it like coincidence. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that jumps to conclusions, but in a way that respects what actually happened. The early approach didn't fully work, the adjustment did, and once that adjustment was made, everything started to make sense. That's why fans felt validated watching it unfold. Not because they were looking for drama, but because the outcome matched what they had been seeing all along. The numbers backed it up, the eye test backed it up, and the results confirmed it. So now, the focus naturally shifts forward. Because this wasn't just about one tournament, it felt like a clear example of how important fit and philosophy are, especially when you're building around a player with a unique skill set like Clark's. And once you've seen that kind of impact, the expectations don't reset, let A rise. So here's what it really comes down to. After everything we just watched, do you still try to fit Caitlin Clark into a system, or do you finally accept that the system works best when it's built around her?